A warm and friendly hello, welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the Big XII family of podcasts. We've got an excellent podcast for you. Join me in segment number 2. We've got Mike Miller aboard. He does an amazing job over at the Field of 68, taking a look at this great game of college basketball. He is the main man that is in charge of their daily newsletter, and that is a really, really good newsletter. You're able to get it daily in your email. It rounds up everything in college basketball. It's a resource that I personally use, so we are going to have Mike aboard to talk about what we're going to be getting in the Big 12 this year. I know that he does a great job taking a look at that fine conference. I know that Kansas lost an exhibition game to Illinois. What should we be taking from that? What should we not be taking from that? Are there some question marks with this Kansas team? Is there some things that we should be watching out for? We are going to be addressing all those questions. I'm also going to be asking him about if the travel in the Big 12 is going to be weighing them down a little bit this year, if that's going to amplify how much home court advantage should be worth in the Big 12. We're also going to be taking a look at the new teams in that conference and taking a look at the landscape of college basketball as well with regards to the top teams and how big of a difference there is from the couple of top teams in college basketball like Duke, like Kansas, compared to some of those teams that they might be just outside of that top tier. So we're going to be talking about that with Mike in segment number 2. Here in this segment, we're going to give you guys a little bit of a roundup as to everything that we saw in college basketball over the last 24 hours. On this podcast, we have already done a preview podcast for all 32 conferences and our lone independent, Chicago State. If you're on Twitter/X, I posted up the Apple Podcast link for all of those. And if you're on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts, if you're looking for a specialized conference preview podcast, whether that be the Big 12, the Big 10, the Atlantic Sun, just scroll down the list. They're all labeled, so we've got you guys covered there. And if you do have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you do have one of two ways to be able to fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at unit_D1. Keep in mind, letters EM, name does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline, and the other way is via an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire on whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. And with regards to what we've seen in college basketball over the last 24 hours, this happened very, very late on Monday. It happened before I recorded yesterday's podcast, but we saw Louisville lose that exhibition to Kentucky Wesleyan, and we knew that this Louisville team was going to suck, but very striking because I've been saying this on this podcast, and I am a firm believer of this. You don't want to just be looking at the final score of these scrimmages. You want to be taking a look at the context, and the context is Kenny Payne was mentioning a gentleman that needed to step up and give the team a few more rebounds. I think his last name is Okafor. I might be mistaken on that, but he was mentioning, we needed 2 more rebounds out of this guy. He didn't play him for a single minute in the game. Like, my goodness gracious, it feels like he's just brain dead right now, so those are the sorts of things that you want to be taking away from the scrimmages. The loss to Kentucky Wesleyan is bad, but, hearing junk like that has to have you very, very out on Louisville, and I actually put them in my projector finish ahead of Notre Dame. If I had to do it right now, Notre Dame is now ahead of Louisville, because Mike Shrewsbury, even though he probably has less talent to work with Kenny Payne, he's a competent coach, and for Kenny Payne, this might be one of the worst hires at the Power 5 level that we have ever seen. So that's relatively rough. And speaking of relatively rough, everything that is happening with West Virginia right now this team just cannot catch a break to save their lives, as Kirk Reese is going to miss the first 9 games of the season because there was an eligibility concern with him who apparently received impermissible benefits while enrolling at the University of Arizona. So now they're going to be without him, and things just continue to get worse and worse and worse for West Virginia. You really do feel, by the way, just on a humanistic standpoint as well, for a Cook who did collapse in that scrimmage that we saw last week. I believe that one was against George Mason, and not even just from a basketball standpoint, from just a humanistic standpoint, you just hope for the absolute best for him, because you never want to see that. But without Kirk Reese for the first 9 games of the season, Seth Wilson probably needs to be your starting point guard. Noah Farrakhan is someone that comes in via the transfer portal, but I don't think he's going to be eligible, and that leaves you with Jesse Edwards, Quinn Slisnicki. I mentioned Wilson before, and then you're probably going to have to throw out there 6'7" Josiah Harris. You probably throw out there Jeremiah Bembry, who, I mean, he's a solid freshman, but he's not even a top 100 freshman. West Virginia is just out of bodies right now. I'm not even kidding. West Virginia is just out of scholarship players right now with everything that has happened because they were really banking on Raekwon Battle to be able to get that waiver. We're also going to be talking with Mike in a few minutes a little bit about some of the teams that did not get waivers. I don't know if West Virginia comes up or not because I did the podcast interview before we knew that Kirk Kriisa was going to be getting docked these 9 games that was going to be out full. But I mean, for these first 9 games, you just look around and you've got to be wondering what in the heck is West Virginia going to do, because I've already done my initial handicap and some of my initial lines with regards to what we're going to be getting night number 1, and I was having West Virginia as a little bit of a favorite in this game against Missouri State, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to put them as an underdog on their home court, but my goodness gracious, I am going to be going back through tonight, and I have to dock them at least 3 points on the spread because not only is Kirk Kriisa a high-usage guy, you just now, once again, have nothing behind him. I initially had West Virginia as a 7-point favorite. There's no way I could place them as anything more than maybe even a 6-point favorite, and I might need to go lower than that. This is going to be a game I reevaluate over the next 48 or so hours, and man, West Virginia, you have to feel like there's a very good possibility that they lose that game outright to Missouri State just due to a lack of bodies. So that's something that I am taking a look at, and I am going to be posting up the link to the spreadsheet within the next 48 or so hours. I've been doing my initial lines right now. Bookmakers, they have yet to put anything out. I've got my initial handicaps. I do want to be crossing the T's, dotting all the I's. Those of you guys following along on Twitter/X have gotten a nice little preview of this, but I will be squaring that away within the next few days, and that podcast spreadsheet link, that'll be in the show notes wherever you hear podcasts, so be on the lookout for that as well. It is also going to be a case where Chris Mannion is going to be playing his last year in the Ivy League. The Ivy League does not allow for graduate transfers. This is year number 4 for him for Cornell. So you just decide, you know what, I'll be entering into the transfer portal at the end of the year. Really status quo. I don't make a lot of it for this year, but you're seeing that more and more in the Ivy League. And then on a little bit of a good news front, Braxton Mayo, it sounds like he should be good to go for the start of the season for Washington. Now, we don't know about Brandon Kepanog yet. Kepanog in 9 games, he was able to be a solid rebounder. And Mayo, he's 7'1" last year for Washington. He averaged right around 9 points, 7 boards, block and a half per contest, and I am really bullish on this Washington team. They bring in someone in Paul Mulcahy who's able to stuff the stat sheet. Xavier Wheeler was very solid 2 years ago at Kentucky. I recognize that last year things went off the rails for him, but being able to team him up with Keon Brooks, who he played along with at Kentucky a few years ago, I actually think that there's upside with this Washington team. Now, I've got my question marks with Mike Hopkins, and I think those are very fair question marks, but I am feeling a little bit bullish about this team, so that's something to take a look at. Also something to take a look at with regards to Arizona. Seems like Umar Ballo has been a little bit limited the last few days in practice, and Pell Larson was unable to get out there on the court for Arizona. That is something that I'm going to be mindful of. Their first game against Morgan State, so not too worried about that game, but moving forward for Arizona because they are going to have a very tough test towards the back half of week number 1. That is going to be really something to take a look at. And with this Arizona team, they did do a good job of being able to challenge themselves in the non-conference portion of the schedule. And I do think that there is going to be some very interesting games, including that one that is going to be coming up against Duke. And I believe that that is a road game that Arizona is going to be playing as well. And then we did see Caden Chedrick be out of the fold with regards to that team's exhibition game. At this point, I am thinking that he and Dylan Dessou unlikely to be out there on the court for Texas to begin the season. Those are some lingering issues that I'm taking a look at. And good news on the St. John's front, because we remember they lost that scrimmage to Pace College a few days ago, in which Joel Soriano and Jordan Dingle did not participate in. Dingle was back at practice on Monday. Joel Soriano appears as though he should be good to go opening night on November 7th as well. So we're trying to keep you guys straight with all this injury news. We're trying to give you guys as many edges as humanly possible. And something that gives me a little bit of an edge is that Field of 68 newsletter. They do a good job rounding up some news It helps me be able to take a look at some of the big things in college basketball all in one nice place. And the man that runs that, Mike Miller, he joins me next. We're going to be talking a little Big 12. We're also going to be diving in on just the hierarchy of college basketball and whether or not a little bit of travel might be of concern for these teams in the Big 12. That is up next right here on Discuss Hoops with myself, Greg Peterson, now a part of the Beast Family Podcast.
Sports Betting Innovative Analytics has taken the guesswork and emotion out of sports betting to bring you an innovative and trustworthy resource to enhance your journey to becoming a winning player. With industry-leading money-back guarantee options backed by their sophisticated modeling, they want to introduce you to a system that's not widely seen or available to help you beat the bookmaker. Specializing in NBA, college basketball, and WNBA, your first week is always free. Get started at SBIA1.com today.
And we're back to lovely Las Vegas for Discuss Hoops with myself, Greg Peterson, now part of the Beast Family Podcast. It is great to be joined by this man as Mike Miller. He does tremendous work over at the Field of 68. For those that subscribe to their newsletter over there, he's the main man that runs that. I know that he had a little bit of a hand to play with regards to the Almanac as well. That was Field of 68, T-Check, CBB, 3-Man Weave, all doing a tremendous job getting us set for the upcoming college basketball season. And Mike, I know that he is a man that loves Kansas and all of their college basketball, but he loves all 362 college basketball teams. And you're able to follow him on Twitter/X at Mike Miller, his first and last name, the letter F and the number 68 all together. And Mike, great to have you aboard. Thank you.
Hey, thanks. That's actually not true. There are two teams I'm not fond of, and that's Missouri and Kansas State. But the other 359 teams are all good in my book.
Absolutely. We all have those one or two teams that are a little bit of a thorn in the side. And how about if we start right there with regards to the Big 12? Because I know that there's a lot of people that they are reacting to what we saw on Sunday with Kansas losing the exhibition game to Illinois. I personally make pretty much nothing out of it, but I do think that it is going to be an interesting Big 12 this season because, as we know, it has expanded to 14 teams, and I'm not sure how you've been taking a look at this conference or not, but one of the biggest takeaways I've had here in the offseason, just watching from the football front, is that I feel like with the added travel, home court is going to be a little bit more meaningful in this conference this year than it meant in past years, because I do think that the travel will take a little bit of a toll on these guys.
It could. I think, the fact that the Big 12 used to just be West Virginia was the only long trip for any of the schools was okay. But now it's like you got to throw in a trip to Florida in the middle of the week. You might have to go over the mountains to BYU, let alone to what the other schools are looking at. So it'll be interesting for sure. I think the travel is interesting. And I think them losing the true home and home schedule will also be interesting. It's one of those things where Texas people will tell you they got hosed in their final year of the conference because they don't get to have Kansas at home. And, there will be certain teams that just favors now, where if you only have to play a team once in your league, and you can't get them in that return game, that'll be the other real differentiator here. All the other power conferences have that basically, where they're trying to, except for the Big East, they're all trying to figure out, okay, how do we make sure that it's not just this random team that wins because they have a lighter schedule. I would say Pitt and Texas A&M both had that work in their favors last season. We'll see if those kind of things emerge this year with the Big 12.
Yeah, I think that is going to be really important to take a look at. And what else I think is going to be really interesting about the Big 12 as well is how some of these newer teams are able to rise up in the conference, because the Big 12 is lauded for having those 10 teams, every single one of them being rock solid. And now there are 4 teams. I had no doubt about it. Houston, one of the best teams in all of college basketball. But how do you view the fact that there is going to be Central Florida along with Cincinnati and BYU coming along? Because I actually do feel very good about BYU, and I was feeling good about Cincinnati too. But with Cincinnati not having their big men getting waivers, I do have a little bit of a fear of them falling towards the bottom of the conference and perhaps hurting a little bit of the product overall, along with Central Florida. I just don't know if they're on par with the rest of the Big 12.
I think Central Florida is definitely destined for the bottom of the conference. I'm not sure there's any way around that. I think you would say their talent does not match the rest of the Big 12, so it's getting better. And Central Florida is also one of the schools that had a lottery pick come out of last year. So it's not like they don't have talent. But I also think they have the worst coach in the Big 12. I don't know how much longer Johnny Dawkins will be there, and I think that plays a factor in something like this. A good coach is worth an extra 5 to 10 points every game And over the course of the season, that matters. So I don't know. I'm not as high on BYU as some of the other prognosticators are. I'm not sure they're a team that can compete with Big 12 physicality. I think if their offense is clicking, they'll be a handful. And I certainly think they'll be a handful at home. I don't know if you've ever made it out to Provo. It is a definitive home court advantage. And I think it'll certainly take Big 12 schools by surprise. Gonzaga would certainly tell you that over the last few years. And I would agree with you about Cincinnati. They certainly need those waivers to go through. I know their appeals are in process right now. Your guess is as good as mine if the NCAA is going to come through on appeal. But yeah, Cincinnati certainly needs those big men up front.
Yep, I agree with you. And with the Cincinnati team, I think that they're well coached and everything, but that just will stick any team behind the 8 ball. As Mike Miller does great work over at the Field of 68, is joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And Mike, in terms of that team that you know and love so well in Kansas, what is your outlook for them for the upcoming year? Because I mentioned the fact that they lost that scrimmage Illinois. Again, I make absolutely nothing out of it whatsoever, but I do make a little bit of something out of the fact that I do feel like there are a few fair question marks with this team with not having Arterio Morris out there. And on top of that, I do think that the transition of Nicholas Timberlake going from the CAA to the Big 12 is something worth monitoring because I feel like Kansas is banking on him quite a bit to be that outside shooting force for them.
It's certainly worth monitoring. You saw, if you watched the scrimmage, his athleticism did not translate yet. And I think that's probably more prevalent against a team like Illinois, which has as many high caliber athletes as just about any power conference team out there. But Timberlake wasn't able to create his own shot. I think that Bill Self will be able to scheme quite a bit for him in terms of getting him good looks. I don't think there's a better coach in America when it comes to creating offense for specific players, offsets that accentuate their offensive capabilities. But the other thing that was interesting is that they're definitely going to need Timberlake because the other shooting wasn't there. And I think you saw that their freshmen had points where they looked promising, and they were without freshman Johnny Furphy tonight, who's just about the tallest players on the roster. He's still out with shin splints. My thought on Kansas this year is that they're certainly a title contender. I think any year you have elite talent on the roster coupled with Bill Self and they're healthy, they're as dangerous a threat to win as anybody. How the defense adjusts will be interesting. The perimeter defense should be stupendous. And as long as Hunter Dickinson stays out of foul trouble, scoring against Kansas should be really hard. The offense should be able to manufacture plenty of points, but you have to hope for health. You have to hope that the team meshes around a big persona like Dickinson, who, if you talk to any Michigan fans over the last 2 years, they didn't always love him on the court, and they certainly didn't love him off the court. And I think when you're talking about a team that requires extreme cohesion on the court because of the defensive requirements, because of what Bill Self expects out of his team, if you're missing assignments, if you're not doing your job on defense, he'll sit you. And Dickinson will be the test for that. He's not going to be a guy who's going to be bad on defense, but if there are any fissures created within the team for whatever reason, that will certainly be something to monitor.
I do think that is always something to take a look at because you are not joking around there with the way that Bill Self will get into you. He will bench guys, and he does want to see that supreme defense. So it is going to be interesting to monitor Kansas coming into the year, and whether you've got Kansas number 1 or number 2, I do think that they're going to be in for a tremendous year. But I do think that in terms of lay of land in college basketball, whether or not you've got Kansas or Duke at number 1 or number 2, I do feel like it is very tightly knit up there at the top because those are the top teams. And then a team out there in the Big 12, and Houston is another one that I'm very bullish on. I feel like the SEC doesn't necessarily have a Final Four team, but they've got a lot of solid teams. And how do you just take a look at the lay of the land in college basketball coming into the year? Because this year, I think much like many of them sans that year in which Gonzaga and Baylor were really the clear-cut top 2, is much like what we've been seeing in recent years, in which it's tightly grouped up there at the top. And I do feel like there's a lot of contenders and not necessarily that one team that you'd say is head and shoulders the best in all of college basketball.
Yeah, you certainly wouldn't say that. I think there are teams that at this point in the year, before any actual games get going, you would look at them and identify them as top tier. Now, I've got Purdue number 1, and Arkansas fans may scoff at that after their exhibition. But to me, Purdue has the highest floor out of any team right now. And when you're talking about how you look at a season coming into it. You should look at what the team's floor is. The ultimate ceiling is something you can figure out in March and what the draw looks like once you hit the bracket. But the floor is where you should be looking at for regular season success. And to me, Zach Edey raises the floor just about more than any other player in the NCAA. And I think that Braden Smith is due for a jump. I think that it's a team that added athleticism over the summer and Colvin. And I think that, as long as they can be just above an average 3-point shooting team, they're going to be really dangerous. I like Purdue quite a bit. Whether they caught in March, I don't know. But right now, that would be the team I think is tremendous. I think the 3 Big East teams in UConn, Creighton, and Marquette are all worth watching. I think I'd be a little bit worried about Marquette's defensive liabilities, especially as they adjust the loss of Omax Prosper. Connecticut will be young. I would expect them to be significantly better by the end of the season than at the start, because you also wonder how healthy Donovan Klingen's foot is. But I think Creighton is as good a bet as anybody. I think Ryan Kalkbrenner is a tremendous center. I think Trey Alexander should probably lead that team in scoring as long as he finally takes the jump to be a little more assertive. Baylor Shireman's awesome off the ball, on the ball. I think Stephen Ashworth was a tremendous addition for them from a shooting perspective. I think their floor is also really high. Those are the teams that I would look at, and none of those are any surprise when it comes to a national title contender. The team, I'm still waiting to see how they look, especially after 2 scrimmages where they were really, really bad, is Florida Atlantic. I'm a believer in the Owls. I think that people will dismiss them as not having elite talent, dismiss them as a one-year wonder, but they won 35 games last year. And I think that, they got a good balance against Memphis in the NCAA tournament, but they showed all season they were really good. And I don't think that making the jump to the AAC is going to be a significant challenge for them, especially when the AAC is not necessarily a league that is without its pushovers. They've got new teams in that league as well, and the bottom 5-6 teams in that league are going to be awful. So I think they're not going to see much of a difference in their transition. I'm hopeful that the Owls are one of those teams that kind of defy what preseason computer expectations are for them versus what the humans seem to have thus far. I'm one of them that has FAU as a top 10 team.
Heck, half of the teams that they're going to be seeing in the American are going to be teams that they were playing against last year in Conference USA as well. So I do think that is going to be an interesting dynamic with Florida Atlantic, as Mike Miller is joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops. And a similarity that I saw with a lot of those teams that you mentioned were teams that use the transfer portal selectively. Now, Florida Atlantic, they really did not use it at all, but a team like Creighton they did not, but a team like Creighton is always what I think is a blueprint way of being able to utilize the transfer portal in this day and age. You don't bring in a whole bunch of guys, because we've seen a few teams that have been able to do a solid job when they bring in a bunch of transfers, but typically when you bring in a lot of new moving parts, it does cause for a little bit of volatility. I don't think that teams are able to reach that peak. Meanwhile, when you bring in like 1 or 2 rock solid pieces, and we even saw that with North Carolina in 2022. Granted, it was a great run, but really other than Brady Manick, they didn't bring in a lot via the transfer portal. There was guys that were there the previous year. I always think that those are teams that we should be a little bit more bullish on. They don't necessarily get a ton of headlines, but I think that they utilize it in the proper way. I'm not sure how you feel about teams that they utilize the transfer portal for that 1 or 2 pieces, but I think that's a textbook way to use it in this day and age.
Well, it's the unknown that you're guarding against, right? Ideally, you're using the transfer portal to address significant needs as long as you like the team you have. I mean, if you're somebody like Rick Pitino, you don't like any pieces of your team and you rebuild your team completely from scratch. Or if you're Carolina, you use the transfer portal to address an existing roster departure in Caleb Love and then bring in pieces to fit them. But I mean, even a team like Marquette or Michigan State or FAU, none of them added players in the portal, but it's anymore in the portal. I think it's just as important to consider not just who you added, but who you didn't lose. I think that's one of the things we'll see with Creighton, and we'll have to learn is, did they get worse by not retaining Ryan Nemhard or Arthur Kaluma? And did the players they replaced them with, are they good enough to bring in instead? And we'll see. I've heard a lot of people talk about Villanova, where if Jay Wright was still coaching this team with the talent that they did add within the portal, I think it's now 4 new players that are all highly capable, high major talents. that they would be a Final Four contender, but people are unsure about how they'll mesh under Kyle Neptune. But you say the same thing about UCLA. They didn't necessarily hit the transfer portal, but they're a new look team. Adem Bona is the one guy in there that saw significant time last year, and now they're using a bunch of international players to come in. You might even say a team like Baylor, which has traditionally done a great job of developing players and adding the right pieces in the transfer portal. They've got a team this year that is really new. We'll see how they all mesh together. The last few seasons for Baylor have not been what you would expect for a Baylor defense. They've been all about offense. And I think that'll be the thing that you'll have to look at with a team like that. The team I think that did the best in the transfer portal that probably enough people aren't talking about is Tennessee, where Tennessee shouldn't have much of a drop-off defensively this year, even though they no longer have the big guy in the middle in Plavsic and then Phillips, the wing who went in the NBA draft. They'll still have a really solid defense. They'll probably be a top 10 defense. But they did exactly what they should have done in the portal, which is add guys who can raise their floor significantly on offense. Dalton Knecht's offensive ability is awesome. He's not just a shooter for anybody who saw his dunk in the Michigan State scrimmage when he threw it down over Malik Hall. But then they added a freshman, Freddie DeLeon. He's the walking bucket. I think Jordan Gainey will provide some real offensive pop for them. They're a team that did exactly what they should have done in the transfer portal. It's going to allow them to not have to rush Zakai Ziegler back. Who knows? Maybe this is finally the year when you see a team break through, and that team could be Tennessee.
Yeah, with Tennessee, the biggest question is, can they do it in March? Because we have seen them in conference play always be rock solid. That defense, it's going to be one of, if not, in case of last year, the best in all of college basketball in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. They guard the three. Just all about finding that scoring. And if they are able to have Zakai Ziegler get fully healthy, be firing all cylinders this year, I think that would be going a long way for them, just like great guests go a long way in helping out this podcast. And Mike, you're certainly one of them. You do an amazing job over at the Field of 68. You do such good work with that newsletter every single day over there. And I know you, much like everyone else, getting set for what is going to be an amazing college basketball season. So let the good people at home know it's all on tap for you and how people can follow along on social media and other platforms.
Yeah, sure. So I think you identified my Twitter handle earlier. It's Mike Miller F68. You can follow me on Twitter, although I'm not as active as some of the other college hoops prognosticators. And then you can read the Field of 68 daily at fieldof68.beehive.com. Put in your email address, and then we pop in your inbox every Monday through Friday around 8 a.m. Eastern Time. It's a rundown of the most important things that happened the day before, or in the case of Monday, what happened over the weekend. Everything you should know, whether it's in-depth analysis of certain things, or if you're just getting quick links for recruits or longer reads that you might want to check out. I appreciate it, Greg.
I appreciate you, and I am a subscriber to that newsletter, and I can tell you it is a tremendous resource. Like you said, you get a little bit of everything from quick hitters to in-depth analysis. Mike does a great job of being able to assemble that 5+ days a week, and it was great to be able to get him on the podcast. Big thanks to Mike Miller for joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VC Family Podcast. And if you do like hearing from this fine podcast, you're able to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you do have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you do have one of two ways we offer those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at @GN_D1. Keep in mind, letters CM, they mean does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. Other ways, find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. And from there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via the 5-star review. And I'll be coming at you guys every single day on this podcast here in the off season. We're getting you guys set for what is going to be a tremendous night number one. I've already done a conference preview podcast for all 32 conferences. So if you go wherever you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, list goes on and on, just search for whatever conference you want to hear a preview of, and they are all right there. So we've got you guys set there. And then once we get in season, starting on that Monday, November 6th, picks and analysis on every single D1 versus D1 game every single day. I am amped up for it. I always appreciate you guys sitting in, and I'll be back with you once again tomorrow. Thank you.